Good afternoon, everybody. This is Greg Smith with Chart Your Course International. We'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on understanding the role EQ plays in performance. So just before we get started, I want to make sure you can see the lighthouse of the slides. If you see something else, put it in your chat box or ask your question box and let us know that there's something else up there. Anyway, we got some interesting weather news today. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and they're saying it's supposed to snow this afternoon. Anyway, I hope that doesn't happen. Well, everybody's in the mute mode, but you can raise your hand or ask questions throughout the webinar, which is going to last about 30 minutes today. And today, Jennifer Zemecki is sharing the webinar. We'll both be talking to you today and talking about the importance of emotional intelligence. So let me read this introduction. See, our program today is delivered by Jennifer Zemecki, an accredited certified professional coach, and Gregory Smith, the founder and president of Chart Your Course International. That's me. Their combined experience spans over 40 years and a wealth of knowledge working with both large global organizations and small companies. So if you attend today to the very end of the webinar, we have several handouts you'll be able to download. You'll also get a free emotional intelligence, or what we call an EQ assessment that you can take on yourself. That's normally retails for $100. And if you want to get certified in EQ certification, we'll give you a $100 discount so you can teach EQ class to your customers or your team on what emotional intelligence is all about. So let me just cover why emotional intelligence is important, why it matters. So I'd just like you to read over these 3 bullet points here. And we all know individuals who have a tough time with emotional intelligence. We all know today that soft skills is more important than your technical skills, how you relate to your teammates. And I'll cover this point here. EQ is an assessment tool that can help you sense, understand, and effectively apply the power of emotions to facilitate higher levels of collaboration and productivity. So if you're on at the end, just make sure you contact us and say, hey, Greg, I was on the end of the webinar. Send me my free assessment and try it out on yourself. So let's, I don't see any comments about anybody can't see anything, so I guess we're good to go. So let's look at the next slide here. The report is designed to provide insight into 2 broad areas: yourself and how you relate to others. So, we talk about yourself, we're talking about your self-awareness. Are you aware how you relate to others? Or do you just plow through the field like a tractor plowing out the earth? And when you're understand yourself, then you're totally in a better position to relate with other people, get along with them better. They'll want to work with you. You're going to get pay raises and promotions because you're such a great individual. And so in the next slide, I want to talk about the 5 areas of emotional intelligence that the report measures. The first one, and toward the end of the webinar today, Jennifer is going to talk about some famous examples of people who score high and score low, but there's 5 components of emotional intelligence when it comes under the self aspect. Self-awareness is the ability to recognize and understand your moods, emotions, and drives, as well as their effect on other individuals. The second component is self-regulation. Are you able to control your disruptive impulses and moods and the propensity to suspend judgment and think before you act? Some of us have a tougher time with that than others, including myself. Tend to shoot from the hip sometimes. Motivation, the third component, is a passion to work for reasons that go beyond external drives, such as money and pay raises and job titles, and are based on the internal drive or propensity to pursue goals with energy and persistence. So if you have low motivation, you might not achieve those goals that you want to achieve. High motivation is a strong indicator that you will achieve those goals in your life. And then the second aspect is emotional intelligence and others. Social awareness is the ability to understand emotional makeup of other people and how your words and actions affect others. Two, social regulation is your ability to influence the emotional clarity of others through a proficiency in managing relationships and building networks. Before I turn it over to Jennifer, I just have a small story of this emotional intelligence, how one individual's lack of emotional intelligence affected the morale of his organization. I was doing a workshop on DISC for all the prosecuting attorneys in Georgia. And so everybody took their online report, are they a DIS or C? And so at the end of the workshop, one of the attorneys came up to me and says, Greg, you told me what my problem is today. I have a totally new lease on life, and you made me aware of that. And I said, well, tell me, how do you come to that understanding? He says, you see, I'm a high D, one of those people who shoot from the hip. And that's why I have high turnover and low morale in my organization, because I'm not treating people properly. So we set up a plan with him and begin to work on those issues, and it turned out with more employees, less turnover, and the ability to hire the right people. So Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you right now, and let me see if I can get your handouts up here, and I'll let you go with it. Everything look good?
Yes, looks great, Greg. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. And I'm gonna tell you some interesting facts that you might not know about EQ. So first, we're gonna tackle the age and the generation. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about scores and gender, who scores higher, who scores lower. So let's go to that first slide there, Greg. And this is a graph that's plotting age. So it's showing us basically what you need to realize. Of course, EQ is a skill. Skill has to be practiced. It has to be developed. So you want to know, how are you going to develop your EQ? Well, you're going to need to work at it. You're going to need to do exercises. You're going to need to do journaling. You're going to need to do things to improve your EQ. I love to say that attending this webinar, you're going to increase your EQ, but it's probably more likely you're going to increase your awareness of the need for EQ
I thought
and
you could
how
take
you
a pill.
yeah. So there's no quick fix, is what I'm saying. And the graph is showing this. The graph is showing that the younger generation, so right now, 18 to 29-year-olds, that's our Gen Z. They're now entering the workforce. They're young adults. They're still in college, and they're getting out of college. But look at how low their emotional intelligence is. I mean, it's 96, 98. That's not yet even average. We're going to use 100 as the average for EQ. So if we go to our next generation, those millennials, which we love to talk a lot about, right? And we go at the, just go back and then circle, Greg. If you can circle the 30 to 34 and 35 to 39-year-olds, yes, that's where I'm at. Those two groups, those are our millennials. And I want you to note that as an average, now I'm not saying there's not millennials that don't have a high EQ, because certainly there are, but on average, they're still below the 100, the average mark. So what can the millennials and the Gen Z do to improve their ability to perform? That's what this webinar is about. Well, my number one recommendation is work on your EQ, because as you develop your EQ skills, that is going to have a direct correlation with your performance. Now let's go to the 40, the 44s, the 45 to 49, and the 50 to 54s. That group right there is our Gen X. A lot of discussion about Gen X these days because they're poised as far as age goes to take over the leadership positions. But what's happening with them? Well, the younger Gen Xers that are 40 to 44, they haven't quite yet, again, hit the average EQ score. But right there in 45 to 49, as you're hitting your coming up to your midlife crisis, your midlife transition is when your EQ tends to peak. Okay, what's happening then to those Xers that are hitting their midlife crisis, 50 to 54? Well, this is an interesting point. You've got to pay attention to your EQ at this time. It may have a lot to do with hormones. It might have a lot to do with your life situation, kids leaving for college, empty nesting, who knows what's happening. But what is for sure is the EQ takes a dip. And it's really how you manage this is if you're going to recover kind of emotionally. And are you going to transition into the second half of your life as you enter into your mid 50s? Because if you do manage your EQ well in that transitional period that happens around 50, then you're poised to do even better. Because there you can see from 50, 55 to 60, 64, now we're entering the boomer generation. They are at the peak of their EQ. So our baby boomers are the ones right now of the 5 generations that are in the workplace that really have the highest EQ. And
Jennifer?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, a question came in while you were speaking. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I thought it related to this, what you were talking here. It says, how does EQ affect decision making?
Yeah, well, EQ is everything about decision making, because decisions, how they're made is after the emotional response. So the emotional response, the EQ, comes before the cognitive ability to solve the problem. And if your frontal cortex is shut down because you're in a high emotional state, which is called emotional hijacking, you are not going to be able to engage the higher levels of your brain to be able to make good, sound decisions. The decisions are going to be a very primitive way, which may be made on fight or flight, or maybe just strictly emotionally based. So one of the major reasons of studying EQ and increasing your own EQ is the ability to make sound decisions. So good point.
Thanks. Good.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. So to finish up this graph, what I'm pointing out here is that right now the boomers, the oldest generation, has the highest EQ scores. And then as they retire and move into the golden years, notice that the EQ is starting to decrease. So what I'm saying to the younger generations is work on your EQ because it will help you in your area of performance. And for the older generations, don't stop working on your EQ, because if you stop when you're older, it will start declining. Okay, so let's move on from this slide. And before we go, I'm going to speak to genders before we go to cultures. I'm always asked what age or what gender has higher EQ.
Yeah.
And they're almost exactly the same. The males score a 99.8 on average, and the females score 100.2. So we're only a 0.04 difference. So that's why we do say there is not really a difference of male and females with an overall EQ score. However, I want to point out that there is some difference on the scale that we're measuring. So for example, we mentioned earlier self-awareness. Well, this is one that females score higher. They score a 101.7 and the males score a 98.4. So the females are a good 3 points higher when it comes to the skill of emotional self-awareness. Now, one that the males are higher on is assertiveness. And here again, we're not talking about if I'm a high D and how I solve problems. We're talking about the skill of asserting oneself appropriately. And males have a 101.4 and the females have a 98.6. So the males are almost 3 points higher in assertiveness. And let me do one more. Let's do empathy. So this has to do with the other skills, the social regulation, because this is the biggest difference. And this males know by nature, and that is that the females outscore them by over 7 points in empathy. So the females are a 103.7 and the males are a 96.3. So there is a lot of truth that females are more empathetic than males. And it's not because males have a brain that can't be empathetic. It's that they haven't practiced the skill of empathy, because that's what we're measuring in emotional intelligence is skills.
Yeah, a question is how do you train people to uh, assert themselves appropriately?
Yes, that has to do with, first of all, taking the assessment, knowing where they're scoring. That has to do with self-awareness. Again, if their self-awareness is high, they're going to be able to feel themselves if they're being appropriate. If their social awareness is high, they're going to be able to read the room, and they're going to be able to look at body language, facial expressions, and see how people are responding to them. But if they're low in those areas, they won't have a clue.
Sounds like in our training we should add some role plays with attendees to practice certain situations that tend to trip people up at the office.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, let's go on to the cultural differences. I find the next slide really interesting, that the Blacks and Hispanics have a significant higher overall emotional intelligence than whites and Asians. I mean, whites in general are below the national or the average of 100 at 97, and the Asians at 95. Again, this isn't a particular person. This is a demographic of everybody combined. But I'm curious that the Black and Hispanic population is significantly 104 and 106, so quite a bit above. And you have to wonder, what is the cultural influences? What are the values? What are the skills that are being taught that would make such a big difference in these numbers? Okay, let's go on to another direct correlation with performance. Now, money isn't everything, but if you are interested in how does income play in with EQ, on the next slide, we will see that the higher your EQ, the higher your income. So isn't that interesting that the lowest EQ score of 98 is almost 1/3 that of the highest score of almost 104 in income. And even if you look at the middle one there, that's double. So by only jumping, 4 points, going from 98 to 102, 4 points in EQ doubles their income. So if there's any reason why anyone might want to, study EQ, if you're wanting to make more money, There's a direct correlation.
Yeah, well, maybe we should ask the audience to give us some input on where they see the differences in the office when it comes to demographic groups as well as income. So anyway, I throw that out for y'all to think about.
Yeah. Okay, let me give some famous examples. This is kind of fun. You know, in the TTI EQ report, we measure those 5 factors that you already went through, Greg. And let me just throw out some famous examples that we can all relate to. And if we look at the self-awareness on the next slide, some that scored high in the male department are Billy Graham and Dr. Phil and Martin Luther King Jr. And some females that scored high in emotional self-awareness is Hillary Clinton, Meryl Streep, Barbara Walters, and Cher. If you want to move to the next slide, Greg, that would be great. And then also, let's look at some low scores in self-awareness. So for males, and again, this isn't a political discussion, but these are the people that have been studied. Joe Biden, Mitt Romney, Al Gore. And on the low female side, Martha Stewart, Whitney Houston, Britney Spears. So now let's look at some examples of the self-regulation. And another word for the measurement of self-regulation is really impulse control. And if you've ever watched the marshmallow experiment, that clip on YouTube you can find, that's a great example of both high and low impulse control. Which of the 4-year-olds ate the marshmallow and which of the 4 controlled themselves? Also, a group of people that score immensely high in impulse control are the Navy SEALs. President George W. Bush Jr. also scored high. Females that scored high were Jacqueline Kennedy and Jennifer Aniston. Males that scored low were Tom Cruise and Tiger Woods. And females, Sarah Palin and Lindsay Lohan. So now those were the self scores. Let's look at the other scores, social awareness. So if we look at social awareness, that's really the measure of empathy. And for high males, Jimmy Carter, Brad Pitt, Joel Osteen, Gandhi. And females, Laura Bush, Angelina Jolie, Diane Sawyer, Princess Diana. And then this is my classic one that I like to give in my certification class. Low empathy. Do you remember the CEO of BP Oil, Tony Hayward, when the oil spill happened in the Gulf? And he was interviewed and he was saying how he just wanted to have his life back. That's a pretty classic example of low empathy. And as far as females go, Kim Kardashian. And then lastly, our social regulation, which is basically our interpersonal skills. So males that scored high were Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush Sr., Tom Hanks, Abraham Lincoln, Billy Graham. Females were Oprah Winfrey, Julia Roberts, Angelina Jolie again. And low males were Arnold Schwarzenegger. These are kind of obvious. Hitler and Osama bin Laden. And females, Margaret Thatcher and Marie Osmond. So that's kind of a fun look at, we can all take a look at those examples and see really rather quickly how the highs and lows play out in life. So that's where I'm going to pause, Greg, because I know you've got questions for me, and we've only got 5 minutes. I want to make sure we have time to take some questions. So what questions do you have for me?
Sure. I have a question that I'm submitting here. What did you say Tiger Woods was?
He was low on, I believe it was when I was talking about empathy. Let me double check. No, impulse control.
Impulse control.
Yes, the self-regulation was low.
Okay, I gotcha. All right.
That would make sense. right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of recent events which have changed, I think, a lot of the perception of individuals. And let me go back to 3: motivation, a passion to work for reasons that go beyond the external drive for knowledge, utility, surroundings, others, etc. I mean, with your experience coaching people, have you seen a direct correlation between those who have low scores on motivation and their achievement record, achieving their goals?
Yes, the thing about the motivation score that we look at, that's the one in the middle here. Um, what can happen when that is low is a number of things. It could be, first of all, burnout. They may be, this may be part of midlife crisis too. They've already worked for 20, 30 years, they're burned out. Maybe they're not where they wanted to be, they're not realizing their dreams and goals, so they feel very frustrated. And that will definitely impact the motivation score. Also, they may be in a job mismatch. Even that they've been in it a long time, but it's taken its toll. They really are not passionate about the job or about the company. They can also be having health issues, and how we feel physically very much impacts our motivation, our internal drive. So yes, I would say if the motivation is low, it is going to have a direct impact on their output, their achievement, their performance.
I would think if I was an employer of a company, I would want all my team to take this report so I could see those who have low motivation, those who have higher, because we have a skill shortage, right? I mean, we don't have enough talent to fill all the jobs, and good companies need to do something to retain their older, I got that's a bad word, retain their baby boomers is what I'm trying to say, their senior workforce from walking off and retiring and then can't fill those jobs. I mean, I have one client and every manager's been there at least 30 years and they all tomorrow could walk out the door and retire, and that company would be in the tank if that happened.
Exactly. Exactly. And we have to really get more mentorships going where the younger generations are learning the wisdom of the older generations, and then that will fulfill also the desire of the older generations to make an impact and a legacy before they do exit. Absolutely. And I find in my work that a lot of the older generations are still highly motivated.
Yeah, right. Then not everybody wants to retire.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so every, on your website, you should, have a section on, what does it mean to work in this company, and certainly have photos of younger people uh, working there, and having a list of benefits that they provide their employees, so making them a little bit better than the next company down the road. All right, another question has come in. Does your EQ scores change over time?
Oh, absolutely. Realize when you take any profile, not so much the disc, because we know that the graph 2 remains constant throughout one's life, and graph 1 can change. But as far as your EQ and your motivators go, it's really a snapshot in time. So that means that, a couple of years ago, it could have looked different. A couple of years from now, it can look different. So it is very much a picture of how you are, how you're thinking, and how you're feeling currently.
Hmm. Yeah, well, thanks for that. Well, we're getting right about out of time here. Uh, uh, I think everybody has stayed on the call to the end. That's interesting. So, anyway, uh, here's the benefits we're providing you. If you stayed to the end, we'll send you a copy of your report to see if you you have high motivation or don't. and a $100 discount on your EQ certification, where you get to talk to Jennifer a lot more one-on-one. And um, and here's our websites. If you'd like to contact us, you can always email us, call us, whatever, and we'll respond to your request. Well, that looks like we're done for the day. Oh, one thing, let me make sure I'll bring up the page on my website, chart course /handouts, where you can download the handouts. I don't have them up right now, but when we hang up, I'll go ahead and put those up there. And there's also this free information. And if you want that free report, just contact us. You'll get an email with this link in it tomorrow, and as well as other webinars that we have put on in the past. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending today's webinar. And Jennifer, I thank you as always for your outstanding information. So I hope you have a great day, and we hope it doesn't snow in North Carolina. Take care.
Thank you.